A car burns during clashes with police at a demonstration of the Yellow Vests movement in Marseille, France. Dec. 8. Reuters A protester wearing a yellow vest stands next to burning trash bins in a street during clashes with police at a national day of protest by the Yellow Vests movement in Paris, France. Dec. R8. Reuters anti-government protesters faced off with French riot police in Paris on Saturday, hurling projectiles, torching cars and vandalizing shops and restaurants in a fourth weekend of unrest that has shaken President Emmanuel Macron's authority. Police used tear gas, water cannon and horses to charge protesters on roads fanning out from the Champs-Élysées Boulevard, but encountered less violence than a week ago, when the capital witnessed its worst unrest since the 1968 student riots. As night fell and many demonstrators started returning home, Interior Minister Christophe Castaner said there had been about 10,000 protesters in Paris by early evening and some 125,000 across the country. Bordeaux, Lyon, Toulouse and other cities also saw major clashes between protesters and police on Saturday. The situation is now under control, Castaner said at a joint news conference with Prime Minister Edouard Philippe. He said about 120 demonstrators and nearly 20 police officers had been injured nationwide. Nearly 1,000 people had been arrested, 620 of them in Paris, after police found potential weapons such as hammers and baseball bats on them. Philippe said police would remain vigilant through the night as some protesters continued to roam the city. Groups of youths, many of them masked, continued skirmishing with police in the Place de la République area as some stores were looted. Named after the fluorescent safety vests that French motorists must carry, the Yellow Vest protests erupted out of nowhere on November 17, when nearly 300,000 demonstrators nationwide took to the streets to denounce high living costs and Macron's liberal economic reforms. Demonstrators say the reforms favor the wealthy and do nothing to help the poor and build Saturday's protest, Act 4, of their protest after 3 consecutive Saturdays of rioting. The government this week cancelled a planned rise in taxes on petrol and diesel in a bid to defuse the situation, but the protests have morphed into a broader anti-Macron rebellion. Very sad day, President Donald Trump said in a Twitter message. Maybe it's time to end the ridiculous and extremely expensive Paris Agreement and return money back to the people in the form of lower taxes. A protester waves a French flag during clashes with police at a demonstration by the Yellow Vests movement in Paris, France. Dec. 8. Reuters A view of the Place de la République as protesters wearing yellow vests gather during a national day of protest by the Yellow Vests movement in Paris, France. Dec. 8. Reuters shuttered shops. The protests are jeopardizing a fragile economic recovery in France just as the Christmas holiday season kicks off. Retailers have lost an estimated €1 billion in revenue since the protests erupted, and shares in tourism-related shares saw their worst week in months. Swaths of Paris's affluent right bank north of the Seine River were locked down on Saturday, with luxury boutiques boarded up, department stores closed and restaurants and cafes shuttered. The Louvre, Eiffel Tower and the Paris Opera were also closed. Demonstrators left a trail of destruction on Paris streets, with bank and insurance company offices' windows smashed, cars and scooters set on fire and street furniture vandalized. On the smashed front of one Starbucks cafe, vandals scrawled, "No fiscal justice, no social justice." The government had warned that far-right, anarchist and anti-capitalist groups would likely infiltrate protests, and many of the skirmishes saw police tackling gangs of hooded youths, some of them covering their faces with masks. "It feels like order is being better maintained this week," Jean-François Barnaba, one of the Yellow Vests' unofficial spokesmen, told Reuters. "Last week the police were tear-gassing us indiscriminately. This time their actions are more targeted," he added. Protesters wearing yellow vests, Gilets jaunes, demonstrate against rising costs of living they blame on high taxes near the Arc de Triomphe on the Champs-Élysées Avenue in Paris, on Dec. 8. Yellow Vest movement in France originally started as a protest about planned fuel hikes but has morphed into a mass protest against president's policies and top-down style of governing. AFP Macron U-turn government this week offered concessions to soothe public anger, including scrapping next year's planned hikes to fuel taxes in the first major U-turn of Macron's presidency. It will cost the Treasury €4 billion, $4.5 billion, but protesters want Macron to go further to help hard-pressed households, including an increase to the minimum wage, lower taxes, higher salaries, cheaper energy, better retirement benefits and even Macron's resignation. "We want equality, we want to live, not survive," said demonstrator Guillaume Le Grac, 28, who works in a slaughterhouse in Brittany. Macron is expected to address the nation early next week to possibly further soften planned reforms and tax increases. Reuters.